Thank you. Thank you. Fascinating. Colleagues, you can take the floor, please. Lots of interesting material. Please go ahead.
Merci, Brigitte. It was a very good presentation, naturally. I only had one question. I'm really convinced about the data that comes from the femur suggesting that Oraran was bipedal. The question I have is about the phalanx that seems to have more the phalangeal anatomy, yeah, that one. Actually, Almeteja and his friends published that work, which also suggests the same thing. And your interpretation was it's an adaptation for climbing rather than for being a precision grip. So given that chimpanzees are an agile and great climbers, how would you explain the nature of that climbing behavior and how that thumb is used for climbing in Oraran? Thank you.
Merci, Sarai. No, it's a very good question because, as I showed you, the phalanx, the distal thumb phalanx, is very flat, and you have exactly the same cushion that you get in precise thing. Chimpanzee would climb using not necessarily the distal phalanx, but when they actually hold things, they hold it like that, basically. They don't really use per se the distal phalanx. So this is not the same climbing as a chimpanzee, but it's a climbing when you have to assure your thing. It's one of the reason we came to that conclusion. And when we published it, it was accepted by the reviewer. And it's interesting now because quite a few people working on tool manipulations are using this data to help to understand the origins of the tool as well. And it was I may be wrong, we may be wrong on that, but it was the most logical answer we could get at the same time. Because when we took Randy Sussman works, which you may know actually, it's all the single features he was describing on the Australopithecus. And if you have seen on the picture, Australopithecus has much wider distal phalanx. So it was different, kind of different, except that you still have a fossa here, you still have the flexor of the thumb, which were there exactly like that. And Randy took the position to explain it as a tool manufacturer. And we said no, unless we find tools at 6 million years, but it will be a scoop for the academy. So our most logical thing, because of the grab itself, which is different in chimpanzees and most primates actually, would be to have this fine thing. I did not talk here, but we also worked on a statue of Aurorin. And we showed actually that the statue was something not smaller than 1.15 meters, not larger than 1.37 meters for young adults. So it's not a tiny animal. So when you climb, you have a weight to carry. And when you see the camel trees you have got around, you have really to be sure that you can climb properly at some stage. And that's why the Miombo is interesting, because Miombo has thick trunks, but you have to walk to another trunk in between. And if you're a primate, you can jump. Some would come to the ground and would knuckle walk, but we have no evidence of knuckle walking or even flat walking. We don't have that. So it was the other logical, obvious. Did I answer your question? Merci.
If I may ask a quick question from my side. My background, madam, is agriculture and nutrition. My personal science background is agriculture and nutrition science. Tell us about analysis of the teeth. What do they tell us about diet and consumption habits? No, the teeth. What do they tell us about diet and consumption habits?
Microphone. Sorry, sir. In terms of diet adaptations, we think it's mainly on, they were feeding on fruits, basically, but probably sometimes hard fruits as well. We have a thick enamel on the molars, and people sometimes would say it's linked to systematics. So, okay, we could use it to say it's hominid. But I'm more inclined to think that it's related to what you eat. If you have thick enamel or thin enamel, you can eat coarser things or harder things or less hard things. So at the moment, we think it's more like fruits and maybe hard fruits, okay. But you can't avoid also the fact they can have used ground, as do chimpanzees. They do sometimes eat the ground. They might have done that, but we don't have evidence of that. They might have eaten some leaves or things like that, but it's probably not the main diet pattern. Or they might also have fed on insects, but it doesn't reflect on the morphology of the tooth. So we are very, very poor on that aspect at the moment.
Okay. Dr. Hublin, and then Yves.
Thank you, Brigitte, for your talk. Coming back to the issue of bipedalism or occasional bipedalism, could you comment on the anatomy of the pelvis in Ardipithecus? What do you think about it?
This is a challenge for the year, if not for the century. I can't comment really on that, but I read the papers on Ardipithecus, which was published in Science, and several other papers later on. Okay, there is a spine which supposedly relates to bipedalism. My problem is a scratch thing, and I'm not sure that we have just one feature can actually lead to a complete pattern of movement. My concern is that when you look at the lower limb, when it was reconstructed as a long, elongated femur like in humans. But the femur, if you've seen on the picture, is very massive. So if you want to have this massivity very, very light, you have to extend the femur to a stage that is difficult to match. We don't have the hip, we don't have the knee, so it's difficult to know. And we have only two vertebrae. So from two vertebrae, it's difficult for me that you have a sigmoid vertebral column. So at the moment, I wouldn't consider Ardipithecus, highly, but we have to find more. But basically, we need to have this humerus. We need to have the vertebral column and definitely the hip joint, proper hip joint. The problem is when you have a very crushed specimen, it's always difficult to reconstruct it. And at the moment, I don't accept it, but I may be wrong. This is why we are here.
So in Ardipithecus, we would not have this conjunction of dental features and locomotion that characterize hominins.
Well, it would probably be eating fruits, not a problem. But if I come back to the postcranial, the phalanx.
Yeah, I'm talking about canine reduction.
Yes, but the canine reduction is probably something which happened several times in the past. Mm-hmm. And you have probably reductions bigger in some, smaller in some. We have, as I told you, it's related probably to the shortening of the face as well, to a certain extent. And it's also probably you have an expansion. It's not only one species which would give rise to another species, probably have a diversity of animals at that time, but we don't master. So
and would you argue that bipedalism also developed independently in several lineages?
Well, we saw that, we have that in Australopithecines at the moment. If you look at Australopithecines, we have a lot of Australopithecines. We have all different patterns of locomotions, more or less arboreal, more or less bipedal. This is evolution.
Thank you.
Merci.
Just a short point to remind you, Brigitte, and you remember, I'm sure, that since the beginning, since 1974, I took in consideration the famous Martin Pickford's tooth of Lucaino. And when we found Lucy in 74, and when we claimed that Lucy was the oldest, I said, no. That is unfortunately a tooth which is double in age.
And if I may add a short word, I would thank you ever for that, because we were the only one who was confident in that and helped us to work on this area. Merci.
Sorry, I don't know. We can imagine or we can know the time of life of this population, of these people. I think how many years they can live, more or less, we can know.
It's difficult to know. I would say when we were 20 years of our age, you will be already an old guy there, because you don't mature the same way. But we don't have enough to know about paleodemography. It's already very difficult in Australopithecines, and maybe I have more. No, it's difficult to know unless we have more data on chimpanzees. Like if I know some colleagues in Germany, actually in Leipzig, actually working on excavating on some chimpanzee site in Western Africa, and just working this site as if there were archaeological sites. And I hope we will get more data on that. I don't know if it's still on, but I think it's very interesting because it gives a modern pattern. But, and this is the main problem, if you accept that, you must be extremely careful not to consider chimpanzees as the ancestors, because in all these stories, at the end of the day, people compare with chimpanzees and modern and fossil animals. But chimpanzees evolved as well. Chimpanzees very much evolved for a lot of features. And this is one of the reasons I work mainly with mice in animals, because you have the depth of time is in. And it gives you the prudence, I hope so, the cautiousness, but I think it's difficult to further at the moment, unless some of my colleagues working with paleodemography have some ideas.
Mr. Prager?
Just a comment on that. We know from the micromorphology of the enamel in Australopith that they were growing much faster than chimpanzees. So chimpanzees clearly, from that point of view, from those results, are not clearly the good archetype for the common ancestors of any hominins. The ancestors of Homo and of hominins might have grown much faster than chimpanzees do nowadays. No.
Please, Dr. Alemseged.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Jose, and it's only to add that there is a subfield of paleoanthropology now, which is the study of the life history of this early hominins. What that is you can study how fast the teeth are growing, how fast the brain is growing, and based on that, because we know chimpanzees would live not longer after they cease reproduction, whereas humans would very, very last even after ceasing reproduction. The average for the chimpanzees, you could say 40 years, whereas for us now it's going to be 80, 85 years. And because we know Australopithecus afferensis had a pattern of life history which is chimp-like, one could surmise that they were living as long as the chimpanzees and very different from what we see in humans today. I think the longevity that we have today, Homo sapiens, did not come until much later, which is the emergence of Homo sapiens, which Jean-Jacques Hublin is going to comment on later. Thank you.
Just about 6 million years. And then we'd be so happy to be able to solve that. But not only one, we need a population, because the variability is probably as important in fossil chimpanzees as it was in Australopithecines or other hominids as well. So we have a big challenge in front of us for the next century. Thank you.
Yes, please, go ahead. No microphone. You must put the microphone.
Yeah, sorry to interject, but I'd just like to add that the upper molars of Orrorin show what we call delayed eruption. The first molar is very worn, the second molar is basically slightly worn, the third molar almost unworn. Chimpanzees, the molars come erupt quickly one after the other. So I think Orrorin already had what we call delayed maturation, or may not be as delayed as humans, for example, where the third molar comes up when we're 18 years old, something like that. But definitely, in my opinion, Orrorin was already showing a lengthened childhood, and a lengthened subadult period of life. Whether that means it lived longer than chimpanzees or gorillas or whatever is another question, but there was definitely, in my opinion, a delay between the eruption of the permanent molars. And that is really a human-like characteristic, because chimpanzees, gorillas don't have it. And as far as we know, none of the other Miocene hominoids had it either. I may be wrong, but I have a suspicion that here we have something, this delayed childhood, delayed maturation, probably is a highly important feature of Ororin. I don't know if that answers your question, whoever asked the question about how long we lived or how long Ororin lived, but I think the delayed eruption of the teeth is pointing in a certain direction. We may not have the final answer, but it's interesting.
Thank you. Please.
Yes, if I can intervene once more. The issue of what biologists call life history with hominins is not just a matter of life expectancy or speed of development. In fact, we are playing with several parameters, including, for example, the age at first reproduction, the speed of development during different phases of growth and development, like infancy, childhood, adolescence, etc. And then finally, after menopause for females, how long females survive menopause. And so I think we should avoid to be oversimplistic about assessing this story of speed of development or length of life, because it's likely that looking at ancient hominins, we have different mosaics of features that develop in different lineages, because these features have an adaptive significance. They mean something. And so you may have, for example, let's say hominins with not such a long life, but a delayed development during early development, like childhood, infancy, a precocious adolescence and puberty, for example, to enter reproduction faster, etc. That would be one pattern. You can find another pattern in another group. And so there are some of these aspects that we can look at. For example, looking at dental microstructures, we can have some clues about the speed of development before the full development of permanent dentition, but we should not be overconfident about how we are able to assess some other features of these patterns.
Maybe it's also a question of how collective action may have paid off in these early communities, whether there was already a grandmother effect, being a productive caretaker so that mothers could hunt and gather. We don't know. I don't know. Colleagues, there is coffee ready in a moment. This was already a lot of excitement in the room, I felt. Any burning question which hadn't been asked or itching comment? Do it during coffee break. Thank you again. A small round of applause, please, to our two speakers before we break. Thank you.